OpenAerialMap is an open repository of openly licensed aerial and satellite imagery. It was originally created to be a platform similar to OpenStreetMap, but for imagery. In the early days of HOT, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, we had the need to collect the imagery that was made available and publish it online for volunteers to trace it. And so that was the idea for creating OpenAerialMap.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Geospatial Africa podcast. I'm Inyabong Benson, and in this episode, we'll be talking about OpenAerialMap. So it's not OpenStreetMap, it's OpenAerialMap. So in the course of this podcast, you're going to hear a sentence like OpenAerialMap is OpenStreetMap, but for imagery, which is really interesting, right? So we were talking about what OpenAerialMap means, how you can get started with it, why was it built, who's behind it, and how you can be a part of it, and who's using the product for OpenAerialMap, and the things expected to be added to OpenAerialMap. So I first came across OpenAerialMap when I was doing my PhD thesis actually, so I was looking for imagery to work with and learn some things. So I was really excited about it, and I wanted to talk to the people behind it to see what's going on and what was the thought behind it. So I have with me here Cristiano and DK. So they currently work with Hot OSM, and they are taking the lead in building the solution. So I'm happy to have you, Cristiano and DK. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So before we get started, I want to ask the question I usually ask on this podcast. Tell me about yourself and tell us how you got into Geospatial and what you're currently doing.
Yeah, thanks Inyabong and for inviting us to your podcast. My name is Cristiano. I'm from Italy. I've been working in Geospatial for over 20 years. And got into OpenStreetMap about 15 years ago, and later joined the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team and started working on OpenAerialMap. DK?
Yeah, DK here. Thanks. I've been working with geospatial tech for about 10 years now. I started as a developer, working with a tool called OpenDroneMap, and so I've been working with drones and open mapping for that time, and now I've been working with a Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team for about 5 years as like a sysadmin and now DevOps manager, so dealing with a lot of our cloud technologies, but also kind of trying to keep my hands in the fun tech as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really interesting. But can you both tell us what you do at HOT? And what keeps you going in the industry? What keeps you really interested in doing what you're doing?
Yeah. So HOT is a humanitarian technology and capacity building organization. We are trying to enable mapping across the world through the incredible resource database that's called OpenStreetMap, which I'm sure many listeners have heard of. So we're trying to enable more people to map and more places to be mapped through this technology. So we've got this component of our work that's very working with communities, working with partners, and then we also are building technology to support that. So our tech team is now, I think 12 strong or 13 strong, and we have developers. We work basically in the cloud. So my role at the moment is primarily in ensuring that our services that we build, such as OpenAerialMap, the Tasking Manager, the HOT Export tool, and others that we are currently building, are able to be accessible as we sort of host them on the cloud and make them available as websites. So I'm dealing with AWS, with Azure, and making sure that deployments are going well and things like that. Cristiano?
Yeah, thanks Inyabong. I have been working mostly on imagery, supporting the activations that HOT does to respond to disasters. When a big disaster happens, HOT uses satellite and drone imagery to trace and update the maps, the OpenStreetMap data that is then used by responders on the ground. And so I help with obtaining the imagery, requesting it from the providers or from drone pilots on the ground, processing it and making it available through OpenAerialMap, which is the theme of the podcast today.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting work you both do there, and I think it's a good thing. So that brings us to the theme of today's podcast, like you said. So could you tell us what is OpenAerialMap?
Yeah, OpenAerialMap is an open repository of openly licensed imagery, aerial and satellite imagery. It was originally created to be a platform similar to OpenStreetMap, but for imagery. In the early days of HOT, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, we had the need to collect the imagery that was made available and publish it online for volunteers to trace it. And so that was the idea for creating OpenAerialMap, to create a platform, a place for anyone that had the imagery that could be openly licensed to share it with the public, with anyone that would need it. So if you go to openaerialmap.org, you will find a browser that allows you to find imagery anywhere in the world that has been contributed by different providers, by different drone pilots or satellite imagery companies. And you can use that imagery for any purpose that is allowed by the Creative Commons license in your project, as you were saying, for mapping, for tracing on mobile devices. You can download the full resolution image, which can go down to a few centimeters for some of the drone imagery. And really the power of OpenAerialMap is the community of drone pilots and providers that contribute that imagery for the common good.
Right, that's really interesting. So I think you've touched quite a few topics there. You've talked about the history, and I think OpenAerialMap seems to exist to bridge the gap between finding access to free images, right? For example, you did try to bring in the comparison between OpenStreetMap, where OpenStreetMap is a map of the world that is freely accessible. So I think there was a need to bridge that gap as well for making open images available to people. Would I be correct in assuming that?
Yeah, the platform was originally developed with the idea of creating a place for making imagery available. And that happened because in some of the activations, like if we think back to Haiti 2010, some of the satellite imagery providers were making some imagery available for responders, but there wasn't an easy way for taking the imagery and putting it online to be traced by mappers or to be used on the ground. So we had this imagery that was made available, but we didn't have a way to make it easily accessible by the organizations that were responding or the mappers online. And so that was one of the reasons. Another one, and with a very similar purpose, is it was to support drone pilots on the ground, collect an imagery, and wanted to share the imagery with those online or with other organizations in an easy way. And so OpenAerialMap provides that functionalities for those providers, drone pilots and satellite imagery providers, to share the imagery easily as full GeoTIFF image, but also directly as TMS, tile map service, or WMTS, web map tile service. It's different from commercial services or companies that sell aerial imagery or satellite imagery, because the old imagery in OpenAerialMap is available for free with an open license. It's not competing with any of those providers, but it offers the opportunity for those providers that do want to share some of the imagery that they might sell normally to actually make some of that imagery mostly used for disaster response easily accessible by anyone.
All right, so could you talk about the users of the platform? I think Christian already mentioned that drone pilots and commercial image providers can upload images, but what are the demographics who are using the platform itself? So could you talk about that?
I think there are a few different types of what we would like types of users, of people who would want to come to OpenAerialMap and use it, or for someone getting started rather. First, I would say if you're a GIS analyst, you can go on to the map and explore or search for an area that you're interested in, or try to find imagery using some of the filters. You can use those images by downloading the geotiff directly, or use them for analysis or whatever in QGIS or other analytical tools. So that, I think, is one way just to start exploring on the platform itself, find imagery that interests you or interests you for your work. And then I think the other way of getting started with OpenAerialMap is if you are trying to do some mapping on OpenStreetMap or maybe other avenues, but primarily for OpenStreetMap, you might be hosting a mapathon or something. This is maybe in Tasking Manager, which is another tool that we make. And so you can build a project for a mapping project in the Tasking Manager, and you can take a TMS link from OpenAerialMap itself and have that as a custom imagery source for that mapping project. You'll want to make sure that the imagery is pretty up to date, so you're not accidentally mapping outdated buildings or things that maybe not exist, or something like that. But if you're sort of part of a larger mapping project, maybe instead you're doing the whole end-to-end workflow. You're going out, flying drones, you're processing the imagery using some photogrammetry tools like OpenDroneMap. Then you'll upload that to OpenAerialMap, so you've got this really high quality data set. And then you can start making that mapping project in Tasking Manager, or just taking that TMS link and uploading and using it directly in a tool like JOSM or ID, doing the mapping there. I think those would be two pretty typical workflows for someone who's interested in open imagery for the purpose of mapping, or maybe doing some kind of geospatial analysis.
All right, Deekit, thank you for sharing that. So if you are a GIS analyst, drone pilot, or just anyone who works with geospatial data, and imagery is your thing, and you might want to use imagery for something, you can go on to OpenAerialMap and look for images that you can use. Now, another interesting question that I want to know is, how often are the images updated?
Images are not necessarily updated like it would be a map, but are contributed for different parts of the world, different projects, or different areas of interest. And so there might not be a program specific to update an imagery on a regular basis, but OpenAerialMap provides the platform, the means to do those type of regular collections and imagery updates if they were available. But OpenAerialMap doesn't define any type of requirements in terms of updated imagery on a regular basis or on a schedule itself.
And one thing I'll add is, during our design process, we did identify that we want to make it more clear the sort of the date of upload, and when there are sort of overlapping images at different dates, and making sort of that distinction clear so that people can know when they're downloading a piece of imagery, or when they're accessing it, that they're using that they know if they're using the latest imagery, or if they're using something that's maybe a few years out of date. So we definitely want to make that distinction, or that piece of metadata more readily available.
Right, thank you. So the idea is that people can actually know what date the image was captured. So at a glance, they would know if it fits into what you're trying to do, and know what temporal resolution of that image, so to speak. Now, I'm looking at the website openaerialmap.org. So I can see that you're about more than 12,000 images uploaded using 721 sensors, and you have about 1,000 providers. And I can see about the other side, starts exploring, and when I click that, I can see the map, right? It zooms to my location anyway. So I can see it, like the tiles. I believe that these are where the image has been captured. I can see numbers when I hover my mouse on the tiles. And so could you walk us through the components of OpenAerialMap?
Yeah. I would say there's four main components of OpenAerialMap. What you're talking about, the browser, that is the map component. That's just it's just a nice looking front end. And the real interesting bits for me, at least, are behind the map. So there's an API, of course, that powers a lot of what OpenAerialMap is able to do. There is a dynamic tiler, which I'll get to in a minute. And then there is the image processing / transcoding pipeline. That's for the upload, which is all kind of part of the catalog. But I wanted to make this distinction. So the API, of course, is the communication between the index, the database, and the imagery that's being stored. So that's how we can upload imagery. We can get metadata about the imagery. We can actually access the imagery itself. We're not actually loading the whole. There's a geotiff that's sitting on in an S3 bucket. It's been saved as a cloud optimized geotiff, or a COG we call it. And the nice thing about COGs is that they have been built for being able to be displayed on the cloud. Or we're not loading that whole image because it could be huge, but we're dynamically tiling that image. So it's being tiled on the fly using AWS tool called Lambda, a resource called Lambda for dynamic tiling. And what that enables us to do is to not have to store hundreds of folders of tiles at different zoom levels, but we're just storing that cloud optimized geotiff. The geotiff is being rendered on the fly in real time to the end user, and that's the dynamic tiler component. And then, of course, to upload those images, we can accept that through the uploader, which is on the top right of the screen. And you can upload that in different ways. If you've got the file directly, the geotiff, if it's already been created as a geotiff or as a cloud optimized geotiff, then that makes it pretty easy for direct file upload. You can also have it already stored on a cloud like an S3 bucket and provide the S3 bucket. And then on the back end, we have a process for pulling that from the source, the upload source. If it's already been transcoded into a cloud optimized geotiff, great. We don't do much. We just get that into the bucket, or it'll do the transcoding itself, make sure it's cloud optimized, and get that into the Open Imagery Network index.
All right, thank you for walking us through the components of OpenAerialMap. I know that OpenAerialMap can be used for tracing OpenStreetMap data. So could you talk about the synergy between OpenAerialMap and OpenStreetMap?
Yeah, OpenAerialMap was born originally as a supporting platform or one idea at the beginning for OpenStreetMap. And it goes back to the days of responding to the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, where for the first time, satellite imagery providers made imagery available to the OpenStreetMap community for tracing and updated the map in Haiti. At that time, I was involved directly with the response, and we only had custom software such as GeoServer, MapServer to publish that imagery in a custom way. And then I would say most of the imagery that is uploaded in OpenAerialMap then is also being traced in OSM, but there could also be imagery that is just shared and not used for mapping directly. So they're not directly let's say correlated, connected. They're two independent platforms, but definitely OpenAerialMap as a key supporting role in a lot of the mapping that is done in OSM. And
I think we can get a little bit into the licensing as well, because when you upload an image to OpenAerialMap, you're uploading it with a CC by NC license, I believe, or you can choose, I think, a few different, but they're open licenses, and that is one of the things that enables this imagery to be used in OpenStreetMap tracing, because OpenStreetMap has specific requirements around the source of imagery being used.
Oh, thank you. I almost missed that part. which is really important, right? Because people need to understand the licensing. Because I think for me, it's like, I think it might be the same for other people, right? The idea of licensing, the different Creative Commons and honestly, these names, they could be really confusing. But I think it's good that people understand what open the images and what licenses and what they can do and not do with these images. You previously talked about the component of OpenAerialMap. So how about the part that has to do with uploading of the data? That this is for maybe Drone Pilot or any commercial service provider that wants to upload it. Could you talk about the uploading aspect of it, what is involved, and how is that done?
Yeah, there's a pretty simple form that you use to do the uploading. I mean, technically, it's just filling out the form. We accept visual spectrum imagery, so like not like NDVI or DEMs or anything like that, but specifically imagery that you might see on like Google Earth or something that's very visible. So the upload process is fairly simple. You have to provide some metadata. You have to be logged in, and you want to give like the type of sensor that you used. So if it was a satellite image, that's usually provided. If you're a satellite imagery provider, if you're a drone, that would be like the camera that you used, and you would select a license and then the date that you provided it. So that can be well understood that it was provided at a specific date. And then, of course, you provide the source of the imagery, if it's a file upload or if it's on Google Drive or on S3 bucket or something like that. So yeah, 3-band GeoTIFFs are really, at the moment, the only type of imagery that's provided. I think there's been some talk of other types, like more, like NDVIs or other types of aerial sensors. But at the moment, that's primarily what we're taking is that visible imagery that's used for tracing.
So is there some validation process that goes into making sure that the image being uploaded conforms to the standards that you might set on the platform?
We don't do any vetting for uploading imagery. It's kind of users need to make their own decisions around what to upload, and they do need to make sure that they own the imagery and that it is appropriate to be added. Our role as hosting providers is to create a platform for this open sharing. And it's up to the people who want to use the imagery to analyze the imagery, make sure that it's up to date, make sure that it is the quality that they need. We're really just sort of trying to make that available.
Okay, so haven't you had like maybe an overlap problem? And if that's the case, how do you fix that? How do you manage that kind of issues?
I think we do have some overlap issues occasionally. Well, first of all, when you look at an area on the browser, you can see all of the imagery that's there. You can load just that one that you're interested in. They won't both show on the map. We are looking at kind of a global mosaic, which I think is going to be really cool and really great especially for when there's lots of like smaller drone flights of a single area that you would want to map all together. We're trying to work out like, okay, well, what's the best way to display multiple sources of imagery in the same TMS or the same area, and to give people a little more tools to choose and select between newer imagery or higher quality imagery. So that's something that's definitely coming down the pike.
Great. So you mentioned something about the global mosaic. I think that would be really a really interesting thing to see. So that sounds like it would look like OpenStreetMap, which covers the whole world, right? So I think that would be really interesting to see.
Yeah, you could actually see the mosaic now on disaster.ninja, which is the platform that our partners that we're working with, OpenAerialMap, they developed, and there's a toggle for turning on the OpenAerialMap mosaic. So you can kind of test that out if you're interested in that.
Great. So I'm going to add those links to the show notes just in case anyone wants to take a look at that. So what other information can someone see at a glance by just loading up the image on the platform? Or is there maybe information on what software or what tools used to process the image? So maybe someone knows how the whole process was done.
We don't store whether it was processed in OpenDroneMap, for example, in the metadata. But we can get things from the images themselves, like the resolutions. You can see, okay, well, this image that's here is like 2.5 centimeter resolution, whereas the one next to it maybe is a 2 meter resolution because it's a satellite image. So will want to use the one that's higher resolution. So that type of information is available.
That's good to know. Now, these images, that's a lot of data, right? So we're talking about gigabyte to maybe petabytes of data. So how are these images being stored, and how are people consuming the images? Because it's big, right? So how is this managed and done?
So two ways. One, we're hosting the imagery in the most sort of economical way possible. We store them in S3 buckets, which are relatively flat file storage, and we're only storing the cloud optimized GeoTIFF. We're not storing any sort of tiles or sort of processed post-processed ways. So that's one way that we're maintaining a large database. The second way is, I think Cristiano mentioned before about connecting with imagery providers. The original outset for OpenAerialMap was that it was actually a network of databases of imagery. We're not the only ones that are hosting imagery that's being cataloged and indexed in OpenAerialMap. We just provide one resource, and that's that resource that you can use by uploading. And I think this process can be improved, but you can create your own repository, your own bucket, your own Google Drive or something of imagery, set it up in the right way through what we call the Open Imagery Network, and then connect that to the catalog. And that way, those images, if you've got your own large database, and so we want to kind of federate that, and we want to improve that federation process so that other imagery providers who want to provide imagery openly, or individuals who are doing a lot of drone mapping, in their area, they're maybe putting their own imagery into their own storage solution, and then creating that metadata like that's required for OpenAerialMap. All we're doing is making that connection through the API, and they're hosting it. So by federating that network of images, I think we're growing a great community of imagery providers, and B, we're not necessarily the ones that are hosting the images ourselves or hosting that data ourselves, but we're just providing that avenue for many different imagery providers to be able to use an open platform to share their images.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack there, and I think it's really interesting that you've talked about how these images are being hosted. And to summarize this, I mean, apart from people having to upload images directly to OpenAerialMap, they can have their own dataset, they can have their own repository of images where they store it, right? And then through the process you call Open Imagery Network, they can then connect to your service through an API, right? And then you can federate that service and make it accessible to other people. And I think that's really interesting, because they don't have to reinvent the wheel of having to move their own audio datasets to your platform, but then they can actually you create that link through an API. And I think that's really interesting. And you talked about community building. I think the power of the beauty of this kind of project is the community, right? So it helps it grow and helps it continue to thrive. So could you talk about maybe some of the use cases that you've seen, how people using the OpenAerialMap datasets?
I think a good recent example would be in February. There was a big earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria, and one of the things that started happening was that people were trying to get updated satellite imagery and drone imagery post-event to start trying to analyze the effects of the disaster. We were working with some partners, with people who are on the ground who are doing this, making these efforts to try and get this imagery into an open and accessible platform to do those mapping efforts, to assess the sort of extent of the damage, to try and get that information out there for the responses. And so that was, I think, one way that OpenAerialMap was really key in getting that imagery as fast as possible to the people who needed to use it the most. We worked with Maxar, who provided quite a bit of imagery through their open data platform, making that open and getting that up onto OpenAerialMap. And I think some local organizations whose name I can't remember at the moment, of who were doing drone flights, getting those onto the platform so that they could use that for mapping. There's a great project previously called Dar Ramani Huria. Dar Ramani Huria is actually a coalition that was mapping out flood-prone areas in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. They wanted to make the mapping data that they did some drone flights available, and to promote the use of this information in government decisions to mitigate the flooding. They were flying drones and processing imagery into OpenAerialMap to perform flood risk assessments. So those, I think, are two pretty big examples of how open imagery has been used in OpenAerialMap.
Oh, those are really interesting use cases to hear. I think we after this podcast we might see a lot of people using it, and then we might get to hear about more use cases. So I believe that building a project like this comes with challenges, right? So what are some of the challenges you faced while building OpenAerialMap, and how have you tackled it and solved it, or how do you plan to?
Yeah, during the designing and development of OpenAerialMap, we faced some challenges, mostly related to having a platform that could handle this large amount of data. Imagery compared to vector data is much heavier, and so it requires larger storage spaces. And also, when you upload imagery, you might have to push gigabytes of data through sometimes limited load connections. So I would say we work through these workflows to optimize the way that imagery is contributed and also made available. One of the ways, as DK already mentioned, is to have this cloud optimized GeoTIFF. And OpenAerialMap was one of the first public implementations of COG, cloud optimized GeoTIFFs, to offer access to large amount of imagery through thin connections. We also went through different rounds of development, and some of the code that you find in OpenAerialMap today, it requires some resources and support that Hot hasn't always been able to provide. Recently, we were able to secure some resources to do that, and so we're currently working with Contour. They develop geospatial software, and so they are working with us to implement some new features in OpenAerialMap, but also to fix some of the bugs and issues that were caused by some of the software that has become old over the years. OpenAerialMap was originally developed in 2015. We had some updates done in 2017 and 2018, but overall, some of the components, unfortunately, they still, they're still like several years old. And so now, we're working to make it more stable, improve and fix some issues, and also looking towards OpenAerialMap version 2. So we did a series of design research sessions last year, also with Contour, and we're starting to design and think what would be the next generation of OpenAerialMap, and hopefully, we'll have the resources and the community participation to implement it over the next year.
Yeah, 2018 is like ancient times when it comes to software development. So I'm definitely looking forward to a lot of the changes that Contour is bringing and just the modernization to the infrastructure. I think it's going to be really great.
Yeah, well, that's really good to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, obviously we're looking forward to many improvement in the future. We've talked a lot about how people can use the platform, how they can contribute to the platform. Are there other ways that people can contribute to the project apart from uploading or using the data from the platform?
Yeah, I think there's some great ways that people can contribute to OpenAerialMap, more than just through contributing to imagery or using it. I would say first, please come. We have an open community Slack. You can join at slack.hotosm.org, and you can. There's channels about OpenAerialMap. I mean, there's tons of channels about other stuff that Hot does. But I think it would be really great as we're going through this development process. We'll be communicating the development. We'll be putting out like beta testing, and so you can get involved just by providing feedback and helping with testing of the tool as we do development. If you're a user, to provide like give stories of how you are using OpenAerialMap or how you would like to use OpenAerialMap, ways that you want to improve it. You can also find OpenAerialMap on GitHub at github.com/howtosm. You can find, there's multiple repositories there. I think one is called OpenAerialMap. If you find bugs or whatnot, or you have feature improvements that you'd like to make and you're familiar with the GitHub issues queue, you can submit feature improvements there, ways you want to use OpenAerialMap. But yeah, so any kind of feedback or stories would be really great.
As a software project as well, anything from testing the platform to documentation, to contributing ideas through the GitHub repos and through the Slack channel, as DK was saying, promoting the platform through your channels. Many people end up on OpenAerialMap. They didn't know of any other place where they could find openly licensed imagery. And someone saying this is the only place, the only platform where you can find openly licensed imagery that I can use for creating, for example, training programs or tutorials. OpenAerialMap definitely makes it convenient for all of these applications without any restrictions on the use of that imagery.
So what are the future plans for OpenAerialMap? What are the things that people can look forward to that are not available now, but that you plan to implement in the future?
Yeah, with our partners with Contour, we've got a big development goals for sure. Some of the big components of what we would want to call OpenAerialMap v2 would be one, to expand the network of imagery providers, so to make it easier for imagery providers to connect their imagery to the Open Imagery Network. And one of the ways that we want to do that is to implement the Stack API for improved shareability, for improved interoperability of the data. Stack being the spatiotemporal asset catalog, which has been growing for the past few years and is really coming into, I think, a good mature state. We, of course, want to improve the user experience and make it for all the different types of users, give them the opportunity or give them the ability to use the platform in the ways that they really want to use it, through making it easier for them to access imagery, to find imagery, to upload, whatever you're doing. And then, of course, to modernize the application stack. Like we said, there's a little bit of outdated dependencies and things like that. So getting that into a bit of a more modern state, we're sort of containerizing, doing some more serverless, making it a bit of a more sustainable product for us to host as well. Cristiano, did I miss anything there?
I think in general, as I mentioned, OAM is the only place where you can find open source, openly licensed imagery, where you might have different repositories or different sources for open source software or open source geospatial data. There seems to be limited resources in terms of openly licensed imagery, satellite imagery, other than those that are provided by government programs. So, for example, Landsat or all like low to medium resolution imagery. But as far as openly licensed very high resolution satellite imagery or drone imagery, this seems to be pretty unique, considering that there will be more and more demand for imagery alongside the geospatial data. I think OpenAerialMap has the opportunity to grow and fill in that space, and hopefully more and more providers will see the opportunity of doing that, of contributing open licensed imagery, Earth observation data to these common goods.
That's really impressive. Thank you for sharing that. So what would you like to see in the future in terms of OpenAerialMap fitting into the landscape of open data and open source initiative, the open aerial imagery space or imagery capture in general?
For me personally, I mean, I'd love to see a huge scaled increase in drone provided imagery. I think we're just now seeing, I think in the past, even just the past year, a real explosion in the access and the use of drones and UAV platforms for mapping. It's become a lot easier. Of course, it's relatively, especially relative to traditional ways of gathering that information, inexpensive. And we're seeing that these platforms are in the hands of people across the world in different contexts. So I would love to see a real boom in the amount of that imagery, dare I say, global data set. Although I can understand that being would be a huge challenge, but I think that would be really great. It'd be great to see sort of the democratization of imagery in that way, of really getting that coming from the people who are on the ground, these local knowledge, or local knowledgeable people who are invested in their communities, creating this data, using this data, and making their communities better with that. So that's, with data, that's how you're able to, or in some ways, that's how people are able to enact change within their communities. So that's my personal hope.
Yeah, with the advances in machine learning, artificial intelligence, I see imagery becoming a crucial input in a lot of the applications that are traditionally done with vector geospatial data. And so I see in the future, or in the relatively near future, a lot of these applications requiring more and more imagery, whether it's aerial, satellite, drone imagery, but also street level imagery, for extracting that knowledge, that information that is traditionally collected, stored, and distributed through vector data. I see machines being able to automatically extract information from imagery and deliver it to users for making decisions, for acting following a disaster, for assessing damage after disaster. So I see the future relying more and more on imagery, and hopefully more of that will be openly licensed and accessible to everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think those are really audacious goals, and personally also looking forward to seeing these improvements and these new technologies being incorporated into the open mapping space. Yeah, I think that's really impressive.
Yeah.
Can you tell once again how people maybe can stay in touch with OpenAerialMap? They can get news and updates about the project and how it's going, and see whatever, and maybe have general information of the development and how it's going.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier to join our Slack. It's an open community. It's also connected to Matrix as well. So if you're more interested in joining an open source platform rather than Slack, you can do that way. You can find information on that on slack.hotosm.org. We have a tech blog at hotosm.org where we will be posting regular updates for the development process of OpenAerialMap. And you can also join the HotOSM mailing list or the tech working group, which I believe we're calling Geospatial Tech and Innovation. There's a channel on the Slack group, as well as I believe you can access it from the mailing list as well. And you'll get more than just OpenAerialMap. You'll get stuff about what we're, the progress we're making with Tasking Manager, with other tools that we're working on, some stuff about like ethical AI. We're really, there's pretty broad conversations that have been happening in the geospatial tech and innovation space. if they want to get in touch directly, you can email me at dk@hotosm.org.
All right, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to add just links to the show notes so the listeners can have access to it and maybe, get on board with that.
Of course.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you, to learn more about OpenAerialMap. I really hope that the listeners have learned something from this.
Thanks so much. I'm glad we were able to get through it.
Yep. Thanks so much, Inimrong. Yeah, thanks, DK, as well.